lighting people, year after year, we see more and more lighting projects utilizing IoT or connected lighting devices. And recently, the IES has published a standard, a lighting practice that helps lighting professionals utilize and make decisions surrounding IoT technologies for lighting projects. One of the members of the committee, the lighting experts that were on the committee, was Jered Widmer, a principal with the lighting practice in Philadelphia. And we're pleased today to be joined by Jered for 5 big questions. Jered, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Al. Thanks for having me today.
Well, Jered, so glad you're here. Not only are you a lighting designer, you're also part of this committee. And one of the things that I often think about is when lighting designers are trained and go to school and then have years and years of expertise and practice, they're trained on the art and science of lighting design. These days, how much expertise does a lighting designer need to have in the areas of like wireless communications and technology?
That's a good question. Technology is constantly evolving. I think one of the great things that gives a lot of us as lighting designers a good background or basis in what's happening in the commercial world is in our personal lives, from the Alexas and the Google Assistants and the automated home technologies that are being implemented. We're using Bluetooth and wireless technologies throughout our house in a smaller mesh type system. So it's giving us a simple familiarity with it. However, of course, there's a lot more complexities when we get into what the manufacturers of IoT technology are offering. There's a lot more bells and whistles, parts and pieces, and features, and even a lot more of security concerns. So I don't think as lighting designers we'll ever really be able to get a really good understanding of all the intricacies in this. And I think there are other players at the table that need to be part of the conversation to really speak to some of the wireless needs and concerns and the software that are necessary. I think just getting a basic understanding in talking with the manufacturers out there of what's available and having just a high level understanding is a good starting place for most lighting designers.
So when you look at all those, as you said, complexities involved in specifying or lighting controls projects that involve connected lighting devices, when you look at the long list of things, some of which you just mentioned and others that you haven't mentioned yet, what are some of the most important aspects that you believe lighting designers should pay close attention to?
Well, not all IoT solutions are the same. There's constantly a growing list of players coming to the market, and learning the ins and outs of what each of the manufacturers offer, the benefits, the drawbacks, the limitations can be challenging. It's a daunting process because there's a lot of players out there. Not everyone does it the same way, even if the end result is equivalent. So educating yourself on what's out there is critical, and talking, listening to the manufacturers, letting them present, attending, trade shows, et cetera, to learn about the products, and watching videos is great. But the technology keeps moving fast. So the solutions today can evolve to be something different in as little as a year. I do think one of the other things that a lot of lighting designers especially need to know about IoT systems is how the IoT solutions can impact the typical architectural lighting design process. I mean, depending on the features and the functionality that an owner or developer is looking for, the lighting designer might be required to work with a more limited palette of light fixtures. They might be required to integrate sensors that affects the aesthetics of their lighting. They could even be limited to the types of solutions they could use. There might, that could include, how much indirect light versus direct light you can use in the space, or the low end dimming range that you can do, so certain features or capabilities are not hindered. It might even require you to adjust the quantity and locations or density of your layouts to accommodate the IoT requirements for the project. So there's a lot of variables that indirectly affect the lighting designer, even if we're not leading the IoT side of things.
Well, yeah, that's an excellent answer. And really, when you look at the IoT space, there's so much flexibility and feature-rich products available that really, yeah, there's so much available out there. And then there's also some specialized use cases that we've seen, whether it's occupant tracking or counting or asset tracking, as well as indoor positioning. Have you seen demand for some of these specialized use cases, and if so, where?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's definitely demands in specific markets. I think the primary market right now that we've seen really grab hold of IoT and these different features like indoor positioning and asset tracking is in the retail market. I think that the retail market has the upper hand here because they can see a very quick cost payback in implementing the expense of implementing the technology versus the data that they can get out of it allows them to really take advantage of the technology and give them an upper hand to understand shopper behavior, predict demands, and understand not only traffic flow, but how the merchandise needs to change. And even offer other enhanced services where they partner with third-party manufacturers out there to offer specials and other services. But other than in retail, we've seen the IoT technology and some of these features get into be brought into transportation, specifically aviation industry at airports. Healthcare and corporate office scenarios as well are looking a lot more at IoT. We've seen an uptick in interest from owners and end users asking about this. Not all are quick to pull the trigger, but they're very quick to ask about it and understand the benefits and drawbacks and understand cost implications. So I think that as the systems continue to evolve and the price point probably settles more, we're going to see more demand in a more variety of markets.
So your firm, the lighting practice, is a prestigious lighting design firm based in Philadelphia with offices elsewhere as well. You folks were one of the early adopters in really promoting this technology for use with some of your clients for the right applications, of course. And when you consider the projects on which the lighting practice and you personally may have worked on, what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen? I mean, there's so many stakeholders involved in a project, from design development through installation. There's certainly some common pitfalls you may have observed, and if so, what should we do to avoid those?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pitfalls is the lack of coordination and understanding amongst all the players and all the team members. The owner and all of the design team members need to meet up front to understand expectations, needs, the limitations, what other trades it could impact, and start doing that very early conceptual design level of research to figure out what the right solution is. And those meetings need to happen regularly, from conceptual design through project closeout, to keep the ball moving. I think that having an IoT consultant, an IT or IoT consultant as part of the process is very critical. Putting the responsibility on the lighting designer just because a lot of the IoT elements integrate into the lighting system is definitely not the way to go. And I think initially some owners are like, well, you're just adding sensors to your light fixtures. Can't you do all this? And I don't think most lighting designers want to take on the responsibility of all the variables that come into play, nor do I think any of us are educated enough to handle the magnitude of some of these IoT systems. I think the other big pitfall to take into consideration is that the owner needs to be educated and understand that this is not a set it and forget it type of solution. The owner needs to understand what happens after we leave the job site, when everything's done. Do they have internal staffing that can be trained to troubleshoot and maintain the system? Do they have staff that can process the data and deliver it where it needs to go and synthesize that? We're seeing some manufacturers offer managed solutions. So ultimately they're on an annual contract and they handle it all outsourced in the cloud for the owner. So the owner doesn't have to have a specialized staff of IoT consultants to manage the system long-term. But I think that's one thing a lot of owners that we've talked to initially don't understand, is that it's not something you install and you press a button and it goes. So.
Yeah, for sure. And when you consider some of the things you mentioned, and yes, having an IoT consultant sounds like a very good idea. But the reality is some projects that utilize IoT, many projects that utilize IoT don't have an IoT consultant per se. So when you consider those types of projects and the lighting designer is specifying this, from a security standpoint, we hear headline news every month or two that there's some breach, that some system was breached and hackers got into various systems. And certainly IoT makers or makers of devices, connected lighting devices, take those steps. But what does a lighting designer or a specifier need to know about security to properly evaluate a system? Is that even something that a lighting designer can and is able to do?
I honestly, lighting designers definitely do not have all of the best information to evaluate in detail and answer all of the security concerns from any building owner. And so I think it's important to include the potential manufacturers as part of initial conversations to understand what their systems offer in terms of security, whether it's through firewalls, et cetera, in the hardware that they're offering. But it's also, important that the building owner at least have an internal IT team that understands best what the owner's level of vulnerability is right now and what they're willing to handle as far as a threshold. We've encountered projects still to this date with colleges and universities that refuse to allow wireless communication systems because of the concerns over hacking, that every solution we need to present, whether it's a sensor, needs to be a wired solution. They feel that there's still more security on the wired side than the wireless side. So I think the only thing that's really going to change this is seeing our industry get up to speed from the standard side in codes and requirements for the levels of security needed for these systems. And I know that they're not all kind of caught up at this point, but they're all trying to make headway to get a level of standardization that manufacturers need to comply with, so that I think end users feel comfortable and safe in implementing some of the solutions out there.
Well, Jered, the information that you and the rest of the committee put together is very useful, very insightful, very informative, and it's a great roadmap and great guidance for any lighting professional involved in putting together IoT systems or installing them. And always learn a lot when I hear you speak, and today's no different. So thank you, Jered, for joining us today for 5 Big Questions.
Thank you very much, Al, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Hey there, we really enjoyed that discussion. We hope that you did as well. Be sure to click that big LED logo next to me, and what that'll do is subscribe you to our YouTube channel so you don't miss the next 5 Big Questions interview. And YouTube subscribers always receive an early preview to the next interview before we even post it on the Inside Lighting website. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.